Don't look at what your friends, colleagues, peers are doing. Go look at the people that are 15, 20 years ahead of you that have the lifestyle that you want and emulate what they did when they start first getting started.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you are enjoying this show and getting some great value for your investing goals, make sure you leave us some honest feedback with a rating and review. It helps us and other listeners find this show and get the value they need to scale their portfolio. And listen, if this is your first time checking us out, or you're an avid listener and just haven't done it yet, be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Michael Albaum. Hey, before we jump into today's show, I want to tell you about a transformational event that's taking place in April. It's called the Real Estate Wealth Builders Conference, and it's being hosted by my buddy, Dustin Heiner. Now, I had the pleasure of attending this event last year, and I got a chance to network with some amazing speakers. In fact, there's going to be 40 plus speakers at this year's event, including yours truly. So listen, if you want to join us and transform your life, go to rubicon.com and get your ticket today. You can use my name, John, as your promo code and save 10%. Now, this event is for both seasoned investors and new investors, so all who are serious about taking their investing to the next level are welcome. Again, just go to rubicon.com and use my promo code John to save 10% on your ticket today. And I'll see you there in St. Louis. Now, Michael Albaum started his real estate investing journey over a decade ago with turnkey single-family homes. Then, realizing the power of investing, he has spent the last 10 plus years owning and operating remotely single-family rentals, condos, small multifamily, commercial multifamily, value-add projects, double net lease, and triple net leased operations. Let's welcome to the show, Michael Albaum.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Great to have you on. You've got a great wealth of experience in different asset classes, so I'm excited to jump into all of that. But before we do, why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of the gaps in your background?
Yeah, so I did all the things that probably so many of your listeners did and our parents told us to do. Go to school, get good grades, went and got a good job. And then as soon as I got that first paycheck, I was like, oh, that's not going to cut it. It's not going to get me where I want to go fast enough. So got that purple book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. And because I was an engineer by training, math and equations just made total sense to me. So I said, okay, let me go spend 2 years, get self-educated on how to do this thing called real estate investing. Stumbled through my first couple deals, had some life hacks happen at that point in time because of the job that I was working, the corporate job I was working, that allowed me to invest and scale pretty quickly. And then I just kind of fell in face forward to the next thing and the next thing. So that was how I was able to grow into different asset classes, until I finally found my rhythm and groove and really cut my teeth on commercial multifamily value add projects.
I love it, man. You talked about a few things, right? So one, do you prefer Michael or Mike?
I usually go by Michael, but I've been called way worse. So like whatever works for you.
All right. It's funny because people just take liberties and it's just hey Mikey. It's like, oh Mikey. People
Yeah.
so it's like I don't want to just take the conversation to a random place. All right. So Michael, it's interesting, right? Because your story is so familiar for our listeners, right? And a lot of
Yeah.
similarities to my story as well. But going to school, doing what we're told to do as kids, right? Go to school, get good grades, get a good job. You start working, you start to do the math of what you're actually bringing home versus what you thought you were going to be making with that salary, and then
Yep.
starting to map out, ooh, is this really going to be enough? And you turn to real estate. After reading a purple book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, you turn to real estate, started building a portfolio, through some trials and tribulations, figured out what works best for you, and ultimately were able to scale and focus on value add multifamily. I want to go to really, you mentioned that you had some life hacks through kind of your corporate career and what you were doing there. Can you elaborate a little bit more about kind of maybe what positioned you uniquely to have some success and some of the strategies you were employing?
Yeah. So the company that I was working for, I was a remote employee technically, and my territory was kind of the Western U.S. So I was traveling all across the country, and so something I was super intentional about was kind of continuing the college lifestyle after college. So living with roommates, I was a single guy, Um, so I had roommates for forever, even until when I was married, by the way. Like my wife and I lived with roommates because we were saving on costs. So, but some of the life hacks, the corporate life hacks, were the company I worked for. They weren't paying me top dollar as to what I could make in the industry, but anytime I was on the road, they paid for everything. So my travel, my food, my living expenses, and so I had really affordable rent at home. And then anytime I was on the road, I had all my costs covered. They also paid for my car, my insurance, my gas, my cell phone, my internet, amongst the typical benefits, medical, health, dental you would see in a typical corporate job. But so I was just super intentional about saving as much as I could when I was home, living with roommates, and then being on the road as often as possible. And so I just had a very affordable lifestyle. And so I was able to turbocharge my savings and dump all of those extra dollars directly into investing. Because once I got that first deal done, I was totally hooked. And I was like, okay, I have to do this as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, I love it. I obviously chuckled when you mentioned how I'm going to say frugal and efficient you were, both recognizing that you had your expenses being paid when you're on the road, but when you're at home, you had these roommates. And even when you got married, you and your wife had roommates, which I'm sure
Yep.
made for a great honeymoon phase,
Yeah, of
having all
course.
those roommates there, right? Yeah, sure, honey.
That's it.
Sign us up. But through that lifestyle, you were able to really save, and those savings really gave you options and flexibility for the investing, which allowed you kind of create this lifestyle. There's someone listening right now who is, younger, maybe in college or fresh out of college, and they're trying to wrap their head around maybe that lifestyle and that mindset. Can you just talk to me more about some of the things that you did to make that sacrifice to say, you know what? Yes, I know I have some money and I could go out and live by myself, or me and my wife, we can go out and have our own place, but we're going to make this sacrifice for the short term so we have more options in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely, John. It's a great question because I think it is such a challenge for so many young people, especially just getting out of school, who probably did the roommate thing or like, finally, now I'm off on my own. I don't have to do this. What I realize is that, like, what is the upside benefit of living by myself, having my own place versus the upside benefit of continuing that lifestyle? I knew as soon as I graduated college, like maintaining that lifestyle was going to be harder by the day. And so I said, okay, let me hold on to this. Let me covet this as much as I can for as long as I can, because it did allow me to save. And one other thing, John, that I think I just want to mention to all your listeners is I did something that a lot of my friends were not doing, and that's I was renting the whole time. So, like I was sharing, I got out of school, I rented a place. A lot of my friends went and bought primary residences because they can now qualify for a mortgage. They had down payments, and then they were like living that lifestyle creep and inflation that so many of us hear about. I said, I don't want to do that because I want my rental properties to pay for my eventual mortgage. And so that was always kind of my goal. I said, let me keep acquiring rental properties out of state that are way more affordable than what I would have to put down in terms of a down payment to have my own place. So I did the math on kind of house hacking before I knew what it was. I was going to buy a 2-bedroom condo, and I said, yeah, the math doesn't make sense here. I'm going to be paying way more than I would be paying in rent, living expenses currently. So I said, let me just hold off. And then when we ultimately did buy something, my wife and I, it was way smaller than we could have afforded. I'm doing air quotes for all the listeners, according to the bank. The lender said, hey, you qualify for X amount. I'm like, cool, don't really care. I'm not comfortable spending Y in terms of my monthly payment. I'm comfortable here. So this is what we're going to buy. And ultimately converted that into a rental after we moved out. Again, that was very intentional. We did that going in. So I think it's just really important to not let lifestyle creep get in the way. Don't look at what your friends, colleagues, peers are doing. Go look at the people that are 15, 20 years ahead of you that have the lifestyle that you want, and emulate what they did when they start first getting started.
Michael, where do you attribute that mindset coming from? Because to your point, so many people, you sacrifice in your teens, your early 20s, you finally get a job, you're getting the good money and a paycheck, and you want to spread out and get away from those roommates. And you obviously made a decision, very intentional decision, to sacrifice for the short term, to not buy the big house or the house you could afford, quote unquote, and instead to really live well below your means. You talked about renting while owning rentals, right? Which is a
Yeah.
unique idea. Talk to me about kind of where you think that mindset and that commitment stems from.
I honestly, John, have to give 100% to my parents. Uh, I was raised super fortunate, upper middle class. We never wanted for food, never had to wonder where our next meal was going to come from, never had to think about which utilities we were and weren't going to pay. So I lived a very privileged life growing up and even still as an adult. But something that my parents instilled in me very young was we had an allowance, but it wasn't just given to us. We had chores we had to do. And so the more chores we did, the more money we could earn. The less chores we did, it was actually a subtraction. It was a demerit. So it wasn't just here's money, go out and do it. No, you had to go earn it. And so ever since I would like the day I turned 16, I went and got a job and have had at least two, if not three jobs since that point in time. And so there was always this we always talked about money as a family. It wasn't something that was taboo. We talked around it. We talked about it around the dinner table. And so we always had an understanding of like money just doesn't come out of thin air. You have to earn it. And there's inherent value to it. And so that was always just kind of how I thought about money for my entire life. And so I'm super appreciative and thankful for that. I had an amazing gift, which is coming out of school with school paid for. Like my parents paid for school, which is something that I know a ton of people don't have access to or have that gift. So coming out of school without student debt, with savings in the bank, because I had been working since at least again one, if not two jobs since I was 16. I just really understood the power of money and the power of working.
I think what you're talking about really is that early exposure, right? Understanding the value of a dollar early on. And that's, as parents, that's something we're always trying to figure out. How do we make sure our children understand these concepts and what's appropriate, based on their age and,
Hmm.
allowance and all those kind of things. So it's great to hear you talk about it because it is so challenging when there's either peer pressure or just kind of the social norms of what that expectation is. And to kind of stay true to your own vision. It does take a very strong will and a very clear vision of what you're trying to create and your purpose behind it, even when you partner up, right? Because how many couples do you know that run into the situation where one couple want or one person wants to do something, the other person wants to do something
Hmm.
different, and they really have almost conflicting views of how they see money. So I think it's really important to have that vision, to be able to clearly communicate that. Let's talk a
Yes.
little bit more about the investing side, right? So you're able to establish that vision. You recognize that, okay, I want to get into some investments. I want to do some rentals. I read in your bio, I mean, a little bit of everything, right? Some condos, some single family houses, some small multifamily, some value add multifamily, some, you know, uh, double net leases, triple net leases. Talk me through kind of your evolution as an investor.
Yeah. So I, like I was kind of mentioning, fell into the next thing that I was doing. So I started investing in Southern California in a market that I knew. My grandfather had a piece of property down there, so my dad was managing it. We had a property manager who was also our agent. So when I told him, "Hey, I want to start investing," he goes, "Okay, well, let's start here because we already know a person." So I said, "Great, that's good enough for me." And my purview of what I was supposed to do or what options were available to me was really narrow because I had never done this thing called real estate investing before. So I said, great, let's start here. So I ended up buying a single family house. When that first rent check showed up, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is exactly what the book talked about. So I said, let me go do this once a year for 10 years. And in 10 years, I'll have 10 properties. And that sounded like a great idea. Well, because I was traveling so much for work, and now I was a full-fledged real estate investor, self-proclaimed, I said, well, let me just look at the rental market and any market that I happen to be in for work. And so what I realized pretty quickly, John, is like going outside of California, my dollars would go a lot farther. But the math equation or the ratio of the rent to price just wasn't that far off. Like it didn't scale downward in the way that I was expecting it to. So I started buying properties all over the country wherever I could because they were super cheap and affordable. And the rent to price ratio made a ton of sense. That was literally the reasoning behind where I was investing. It was out of convenience because I happened to be there for work. There was no intentionality behind it. There was no like greater market research. Like, hell, man, I own property in Ketchikan, Alaska, which is a town that nobody's ever heard of unless they've been on an Alaska cruise. Like, it is out there, but the numbers made sense and I happened to be there for work. So, and what I again kind of realized is that the bigger the property didn't necessarily mean it cost more, but it did probably command more in rent. And so, just to give everybody some insights, that very first house I bought in Southern California, I bought it for 295,000. I bought a triplex in Alaska a couple of years later for 305,000, and I bought an 8 unit commercial multifamily property out in northern Kentucky for 305,000 a couple years later. So I just was like, wait a minute, if I'm spending this much money anyhow, why don't I just go get more units? The math tended to make a lot more sense. And so I wish I could say I was super strategic. I was very scientific behind it, but I was using my Excel calculator that I built. And I was like, wait a minute, I can make way more money doing this thing and it doesn't cost me anymore. So I just kind of fell into the next thing, so to speak.
I think there are a couple of insights from what you said. One, and we all have to start with that first property, right? And sometimes we get an advantage. In your case, your grandfather and your father kind of were managing a property and kind of had a built-in team there. And our listener, you may not have that situation, right? However, you have people, right? You have friends, family members, colleagues. I mean, if you're local in any city, there's a RIA or a meetup that you can attend. There are people who are investing locally around you that you can learn from and start to take this from a hypothetical idea that you're listening about on a podcast or reading about in a book to now you've got a real contact that that you can sit down with, have coffee with, and learn more about it. So figure out who that person is for you if that is the thing that's holding you back. Go sit down and talk to these individuals and build out your team. The second thing was you took action. You started investing with what you were familiar with. As you traveled around the country, you started researching those markets and buying in those areas. I think that's really great because as you mentioned, as you scale, sometimes you're still paying around 300 or so thousand for these assets, but now you're getting more units. You bought a 2 unit, a 3 unit, an 8 unit building. And now you're starting to see how the cash flow works in some of these larger properties. And that's going to give you kind of more of the ability to focus on scale and building out the team there. The problem or the concern I think most people would hear naturally and listen to you talk is, okay, you've got one in Alaska, northern Kentucky, like these are all over. How in the world are you managing these assets?
Yeah, yeah. I had a very similar kind of come to Jesus moment myself when I realized cause okay, so I come from the insurance industry. My dad was in insurance industry his whole career. And so diversification, spreading out your risk mitigation is something that was like breathed into me since day one. And so I thought I'm so smart. I'm in market A through E. If anything happens in B through C, I'm good. But what turns out is, to your point, I had to make 6 different calls to get updates on 6 different properties. And I was keeping track of this different state filing was due when, or what report is due for that state or for that property. It became so clunky. I was like, this is the opposite of what I was supposed to be doing, of what the intention was. So a friend of mine, he's like, Michael, go get laser focused on one, maybe 2 markets. Hit it super hard and watch what happens. It'll change your life. And I'm like, I don't know, man. That seems kind of counterintuitive to everything I thought I knew about diversification and spreading out your risk. But what I came to realize is that from a mental standpoint, a mental bandwidth standpoint, having to make one phone call to one property manager and get updates about 5, 6, 7 properties is so much easier than having to chase squirrels or rabbits or whatever analogy you want to use for chasing down property managers. It just becomes so much more from an efficient from an operational perspective. And on top of that, what I also realized is that you totally can diversify within a singular market. On top of that, if I started getting a little bit more scientific and a little bit more prescriptive around what it was that I was investing in a market or why I was investing in a particular market, you may not actually need the diversification that you think you do. And so for me, I was worried, okay, if something happened in market in Ketchikan, Alaska, for example, well, that property is hosed. And so let me invest in these other markets. Well, if I went and did a lot more market research and understood what makes a market tick. What are the economic drivers? What's the population growth? What's the job growth look like? I don't need to be worried about a Ketchikan, Alaska going up, belly up. And what I found is a market like Cincinnati, Ohio has so many of these great diverse economic drivers that I'm not worried about one particular company closing up shop in Cincinnati and the entire market evaporating. And so I said, okay, let me go invest in a more major metro area, and I don't need to be so diversified, so to speak, because the market is inherently itself.
Yeah, I love that, right? Because when we first launched this show, it was called Target Market Insights. And the intent was really to figure out how to find the best places to invest. And it's exactly for the reasons you talked about. One of the key things is looking at the major or the macro market, but then understanding what's happening in the micro market so you can identify the path of progress and what's going on in that city. And that does start to insulate you a little bit from the challenges of what's going on. I was in Detroit for 5 years, and obviously, when the automotive industry crashed, that hurt the entire city, the entire metro area. And that was one of the things that was, very dear to me because I was living in the city at the time. So I always had that in the back of my mind. So to learn about industry diversification and why that was so important, I didn't know that before I started investing in real
Hmm.
estate. So to your point, really understanding what makes a market a good market, that's a great first step. And if you understand that, now you don't have to be spread out across, 10 different cities. You can really scale up in one city because every individual property has its own, situations and things that are going to take place, but you're not spread out and it's a little bit more efficient to manage. Now, you also got into, again, some triple net leases and some other asset classes. Talk to us about kind of, those investments and what's your bread and butter today?
Yeah, so the triple net stuff was a function of my dad and the properties that my grandfather held, and so they've been in the family for a long time. He wanted to be a little bit more hands off, so we ended up 1031 exchanging those properties into some double and triple net lease stuff. And so I was really helpful in kind of driving the transaction and figuring out, okay, how do we structure this? What's involved? Because we didn't know anything about double or triple net leases, so I basically tried to self-educated again around what's involved with that. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the things to be aware of? So really got a first-hand education on what this looks like and why it could be exciting. And I'll tell you, man, like triple net lease stuff is awesome. It is super, super cool. It's kind of that definition of mailbox money, other than being like a limited partner investing in a syndication, like I'm sure so many of your listeners. So it's a great, great asset class. It is not sexy. It is not huge growth. It is not value add by any means. And so it's definitely something that can be part of like a balanced portfolio, or as someone that's looking to sunset their acquisitions and really stop growing. It's a stable mailbox money, again, not sexy type of asset. And so if that's you, you're thinking about, okay, where am I in my investing life cycle, in my investing journey? If you're thinking about hanging up the boots, being less active, it can be a great, great asset class to get into.
Yeah, triple net lease is always it's always so intriguing, but I think to your point, when you look at the returns, there's, we have to focus on the risk adjusted returns as well. And
Yes.
a lot of times, with triple net lease, first of all, for those who aren't as familiar, triple net lease, the tenant pays for everything. So the benefit as an investor is you own the real estate, but the tenant's paying for everything, the taxes, the insurance, and that's really easy for you to manage. With that being said, you're obviously not going to make the same returns that you can make on, say, a new development deal or a value add multifamily deal. So for folks who are less interested in huge returns and more about, capital preservation, this could be a nice investment class for them. So
Yes.
when you look at those things, and I believe you're focused more on value add today, is that right?
Yes.
So as you look at value add, and you compare that to, again, some of the other strategies, why do you prefer value add investing as opposed to value add multifamily, as opposed to maybe just doing more triple net leases?
Yeah, for the reason that you mentioned is that I needed bigger returns. So when I first got started on focusing on value add, it was because I needed to grow the portfolio. I wanted to scale as fast as possible, and that seemed like the best vehicle to do it. I love being able to affect the outcome valuation of a property, and so I ended up doing a bunch of basically burr investing, for to use a bigger pockets term, on multifamily properties and then cash out refinancing. I was like, holy crap, like this is insane. So once I kind of got the itch, I got my lunch eaten a bunch of times on a bunch of projects. So it wasn't like I just hit a home run on my first deal, but I realized how powerful this could be, this strategy could be, and how many levers we have, or I had at my disposal to start pulling on to impact the change. As opposed to my very first deal was turnkey single family rental in Southern California. Don't get me wrong, that property ended up being a grand slam, but it took 6, 7, 8 years to get there until I eventually sold it. Versus the multifamily stuff, you could buy it and within a year, you could see some massive impact to your bottom line because of the things that I, as an operator, chose to do.
Yeah, my takeaway from that is, real estate is such an amazing vehicle to generate and create wealth. However, when you're selecting a strategy, you really have to think about where you're at in your investing journey. If you're starting out, you need to focus on both cash flow and upside appreciation. If you are further along in your lifespan, maybe it's more about capital preservation and investing in deals that are more coupon cutters, mailbox money, as you've talked about.
Hmm.
And then obviously for a lot of people, it's going to be a balance or a mix of both. So just keep that in mind. What is your goal? What is your objective with investing? And then figure out the strategy that makes the most sense to you. I know right now you've got myfiacademy.com. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I developed a an online real estate education program for a tech company called Roofstock back in the day, and we had thousands of investors come in and learn about real estate investing with an emphasis on doing it remotely. That program has since got shut down, and so my wife goes, "Why don't you just make one for yourself?" I was like, "Yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of that." And so I already made it once. So I created a second academy online education program, self-paced, on-demand learning for people that want to learn how to invest in real estate or want to scale their portfolio, maybe get involved in different asset classes, but are having a hard time doing it. So we've got content for everybody. We've got calculators. We've got one-on-one coaching, really trying to meet people where they are and help them do whatever it is that they're looking to do. And so it's something I'm very passionate about. Chatting, love chatting real estate all day, every day. Happy to do it. And then, John, I've also made like a bunch of mistakes. And so I try to be very candid with folks about, hey, this is the thing that I tried to do, and here's where it went totally sideways. Let's make sure that doesn't happen to you. Because if I had had access to resources or content like this, I think I wouldn't have made this as many mistakes. I would have made different mistakes, but I wouldn't have hopefully made as many. And so I said, hey, if this program can help people make less mistakes, accomplish their goals, do the thing that they're trying to do, that's something that I'm happy to sign on to. So that was really the goal and intention behind MyFi. And then we recently just partnered with another company called Bold Street AI, and we're kind of taking that to the next level where we're now introducing and connecting investors with all the real estate professionals that they're going to need to scale or build a portfolio. So agents, loan originators, insurance reps, title professionals, 1031s, anything that would be in a real estate investor's sphere or network. A lot of people, like you said, don't have their existing network. So at Bold Street, we're going to try to plug folks into the network that's in their particular market.
I love it. Sounds like a very interesting venture you've got going on there. For folks that want to learn more, you can check out myfiacademy.com. We're going to put a link to that in our show notes. Michael, we're going to transition now and go to our round of insights. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button today. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Oh man, well, an apparent failure. I got lots of those. So I took on a redevelopment project because it was big, it was sexy, it was pie in the sky. It was going to be my I don't know, the creme de la creme of my investing career, and it just went so unbelievably sideways and just absolutely kicked my butt from here to the moon. And so I think I'm still figuring out how it's going to set me up for success down the road. I'm still licking my wounds from that. But one thing is for sure, I will never make those mistakes again. And if anything, I think it forced me to be incredibly resilient and figure out when things go sideways, how to get things done, because there is no other option. As word vomit as that was, I had a project go sideways, and now I think I'm more resilient for it.
Love it. Oh, love the resilience, not the project going sideways.
Yeah, thank you.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for our listeners.
Man, as silly as it sounds, like Excel, Microsoft Excel, it is so, I'm going to say basic, but I don't want people to take that the wrong way, and that it's easy to use. It's just a great resource that that I leverage every single day to track things. And it's not automated. It's not sexy, but it's so invaluable to what I do in my portfolio management.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's got to be Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's so I think rudimentary and fundamental to folks getting started.
Give me your number one insight. I'm sorry, let's come back to that one. Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Every morning I wake up, I do push-ups.
Love it. Gotta get that workout in. All right,
Yeah, gotta get the head right.
Give me your number one insight for scaling in real estate.
It's not as hard as you are making it out to be. And not you, John, but the proverbial listener. I was getting in my own way. And I kept telling myself, one more book, one more podcast, one more thing, instead of just going out and doing it.
Just got to get started. I love it. Michael, let's go in a different direction. You're out in the San Francisco Bay Area. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Woo! Man, there are so many. Okay, hands down favorite, gun to my head. I'm going to go Burma Superstar. It's a Burmese place. It's killer. Absolutely killer.
All right. Sounds like a great option there. Michael, appreciate your time today and just sharing a little bit more about your journey going from, W-2 employee, working in the insurance space, starting to invest, really getting that turnkey property first, and then really starting to scale as you were traveling all over the country. I loved you talking about just the mindset, being able to live below your means starting out, you and your wife, having roommates even when you were married early early in your relationship,
Yeah.
and then being able to kind of scale and just having that mindset of, hey, we want to invest in these properties and let these properties pay for our lifestyle. I think that's so key and so critical, particularly when you are starting out, because it gives you the flexibility to go out there and try different things. Talking about just the different asset classes you've invested in, from turnkey rentals, single families, condos, some triple net leases, double net leases, and ultimately focusing mostly on value add multifamily deals. And also just sharing how important it was to focus on the market, doing the market research, landing on, what you need to know about a market, and then being able to scale that way as opposed to trying to get diversification, investing across all over the country. Thank you again for just coming on and sharing all these insights. Again, for our listeners that want to connect, they can go to myfiacademy.com. That is linked in the show notes. Thank you again, Michael. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.